The Barrett M82A1 stood propped against the cabin wall, its metal frame catching the pale moonlight that filtered through frost-covered windows. Morgan Sullivan's eyes snapped open in the darkness, her breathing rapid and shallow as the remnants of the nightmare lingered. The sheets were damp with sweat, despite the bitter cold that permeated the isolated cabin. For 3 years, the same dream had haunted her. Damascus. The perfect shot. The aftermath that destroyed everything. She swung her legs over the edge of the bed, bare feet connecting with the rough wooden floor, as her hand instinctively reached for the rifle. Some habits never died, especially those forged in combat. At 29, Morgan possessed the lean, weathered build of someone who had spent years surviving in conditions that broke weaker individuals. Her auburn hair, now shoulder-length and free from military regulations, fell across her face as she tried to steady her breathing. The distant thrum of helicopter rotors cut through the mountain silence. Military birds, flying low and fast in a snowstorm. Morgan moved to the cabin's front window, her movements fluid despite the early hour. The choppers were heading northeast toward Devil's Backbone Valley, their navigation lights barely visible through the swirling snow. 2 Blackhawks flying in tight formation. Not training. Not at this hour. Not in these conditions. Trouble, she whispered to herself, the word forming a small cloud in the freezing cabin air. The cabin sat perched on a granite ledge, overlooking some of the most unforgiving terrain Montana had to offer. Morgan had chosen this location specifically for its isolation and tactical advantages: 3 escape routes, clear fields of fire in every direction, and enough warning time to disappear if anyone came looking for the disgraced Marine who had once been considered among the Corps' most promising scout snipers. What happens when a warrior is betrayed by the very country she swore to protect? The answer had been 3 years of self-imposed exile nightmares, and the slow, grinding knowledge that her entire military career had been reduced to a single bullet fired in Damascus. A bullet that hit exactly where it was supposed to, with consequences no one had bothered to warn her about. The crunch of snow outside drew her attention. Most people wouldn't have heard it over the wind, but Morgan wasn't most people. 46 confirmed kills across Afghanistan and Iraq had taught her to distinguish between the sounds of nature and those made by humans. "Coffee's still hot if you want some," she called out, her voice carrying easily in the thin mountain air. Master Sergeant Arthur Old Man Fitzgerald emerged from the tree line below his weathered face, marked by decades of hard living and harder combat. At 68, the retired Army Ranger moved with the deliberate economy of someone who understood that survival often depended on conservation of energy. The walking stick in his right hand was not just for support. Morgan knew he could wield it with devastating effect, if necessary. "Figured you'd be up," Fitzgerald replied, climbing the final stretch to her porch. "Heard those birds about 20 minutes ago. Navy from the sound of 'em." Morgan poured steaming black coffee into a chipped mug and handed it to Fitzgerald. His calloused hands wrapped around the ceramic, absorbing its warmth. The two sat in comfortable silence, watching the snow accumulate on the pine branches below. Their friendship had developed through mutual respect for privacy and shared understanding of what it meant to carry invisible wounds. Fitzgerald had never asked about Morgan's military service beyond what she'd volunteered, and she'd never pressed him for details about the missions that had left him with a pronounced limp and old shrapnel scars that ached when the weather changed. But he knew. The entire Special Operations community knew about Shadow Sullivan and the Damascus incident. "You ever miss it?" Fitzgerald asked, eventually, nodding toward the Barrett rifle that remained within Morgan's reach. Morgan considered the question while studying the distant peaks where those helicopters had disappeared. "I miss the certainty," she said finally. "Knowing exactly what your mission was, what success looked like, who you could trust to have your back. She took a sip of coffee, her gaze hardening. But not the politics. Especially not the politics. Her voice carried the weight of experience that had cost her everything she'd once believed in. When the mission parameters change after you're already committed, when the intelligence turns out to be fabricated, when your own command structure becomes the enemy. "I've been watching you these 3 years," Fitzgerald said quietly, "every week going through the same routines, maintaining your skills, mapping every inch of these mountains like you're preparing for something. But you're just stuck, Morgan. Not moving forward, not really living. And what would you call living art, surrendering to a system that threw me away?" Morgan's voice held an edge that rarely surfaced in their conversations. "They made me a scapegoat for their intelligence failure. Made it impossible for me to even defend myself in that closed hearing." Fitzgerald nodded, his weathered face solemn in the pre-dawn light. "You know, I was at Fort Benning when the news about Damascus broke. Had access to some of the initial reports. Even then, things didn't add up." Morgan glanced sharply at him. In 3 years, they'd never directly discussed what happened in Damascus. It was the unspoken shadow that defined their friendship. He'd never asked, and she'd never offered. "What do you mean?" she asked despite herself. "The timing," Fitzgerald replied, his eyes meeting hers. "The way Volkov's identity as a CIA asset was revealed immediately after his elimination, but somehow hadn't been shared with your Marine recon team beforehand. The way certain CIA officials, particularly Maxwell, disappeared from public service right afterward." He shrugged. "Too many coincidences." Morgan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Montana winter. Harrison Maxwell had been the CIA Deputy Director of Operations, who had signed off on her mission to eliminate Alexander the Viper Volkov, supposedly a high-level arms dealer supplying terrorist organizations across the Middle East. The intelligence had been perfect, the mission parameters clear, the execution flawless. 1 shot, 1 kill at 1753 meters in crosswinds, gusting to 20 knots. Only after Volkov was dead did the truth emerge. He had been a deep-cover CIA asset, infiltrating multiple terrorist networks. Morgan's successful shot had eliminated years of intelligence work and compromised operations worth millions. She had become the perfect scapegoat for an intelligence failure that reached the highest levels of military and civilian leadership. Or so she had been told. Fitzgerald's hint at something more deliberate chilled her to the bone. "What are you suggesting?" Morgan asked, her voice barely audible over the wind. Before Fitzgerald could respond, the satellite phone inside her cabin began ringing with the distinctive tone reserved for emergency contacts. She had given that number to exactly 3 people: Fitzgerald, her former team medic, who had remained loyal despite her disgrace, and Colonel Jennifer Westbrook, her former commanding officer, who had been forced to sign Morgan's discharge papers while privately acknowledging the injustice of the situation. Morgan rose quickly, coffee mug abandoned on the porch railing. She grabbed the phone from its charging station near the kitchen window, recognizing the area code that meant military communication. "Sullivan? Morgan, this is Jennifer Westbrook." The voice carried a strain that immediately put Morgan on high alert. "I need you to listen carefully. There's a situation developing in your area that requires immediate assistance from someone with your specific skill set." Morgan felt her pulse increase, old instincts responding to the tone that meant operational urgency. "What kind of situation?" Navy SEAL team conducting classified operations in Devil's Backbone Valley. They walked into what appears to be a coordinated ambush by a large force of well-equipped hostiles. Current intelligence suggests they're facing over 150 fighters with heavy weapons, organized positions, and extensive knowledge of the terrain. The implications hit Morgan immediately. A SEAL team wouldn't be caught in that kind of trap unless they had been specifically set up, which meant intelligence failure, communication compromise, or outright betrayal. The same kind of factors that had destroyed her own military career. "How many SEALs?" she asked, already calculating tactical possibilities. 24 operators. They've established defensive positions in an abandoned mining complex, but they're surrounded and taking heavy casualties. Weather conditions prevent air support or extraction until dawn, which is still 6 hours away. Morgan closed her eyes, visualizing the terrain around Devil's Backbone Valley. She had hiked every trail, climbed every ridge, and mapped every tactical advantage in that area during her 3 years of self-imposed exile. The abandoned mining complex Westbrook mentioned was a death trap if someone controlled the surrounding high ground, but it also created opportunities for a skilled sniper operating from elevated positions. What about other assets in the area? Every qualified sniper within 300 miles is either deployed overseas, killed in the initial ambush, or pinned down with the main force. The nearest reinforcements are 12 hours away minimum. Westbrook's voice softened slightly. "Morgan, these men are going to die unless someone with your capabilities can provide immediate assistance." Through the kitchen window, Morgan could see Fitzgerald watching her with the patient attention of someone who understood that important conversations often determined the course of lives. The Barrett rifle on the porch seemed to catch the early morning light differently, as if responding to the possibility that its long period of inactivity might be ending. "Colonel, you know my current status. If I engage hostile forces, I'll be operating without official sanctioned military support or legal protection. If something goes wrong, Morgan, 24 American servicemen are going to die in the next few hours unless someone intervenes. I can't order you to act, but I can tell you that you're the only person in the region with the skills and equipment necessary to make a difference." Morgan looked out at the mountains where she had spent 3 years hiding from a world that had betrayed her trust and destroyed her career. Those same mountains now contained Navy SEALs who were facing death because of the same kind of intelligence failures and political maneuvering that had cost her everything she had once valued. "Why should I help them?" Morgan asked, the bitterness in her voice unmistakable. "Where were they when I needed support? When Ryan Hayes, someone I saved in Fallujah, refused to even testify at my hearing?" Silence hung on the line for a moment before Westbrook spoke again. "I'm sending you the intelligence package now. One more thing you should know." Westbrook paused. "The operation is targeting Harrison Maxwell, codename The Serpent." Morgan's grip tightened on the phone. Harrison Maxwell, former CIA Deputy Director of Operations. The man who had signed off on the Damascus mission, then disappeared into the private sector immediately after everything went wrong. "Maxwell is running an international arms-dealing operation out of Devil's Backbone," Westbrook continued. "And he's not alone. Peter Lockwood is with him." "Lockwood?" Morgan's voice was barely a whisper. "Yes, your former instructor at Quantico. He's coordinating the ambush. The intelligence suggests he specifically designed the trap based on his knowledge of SEAL team tactics." Morgan's mind raced with the implications. Peter "Ghost" Lockwood had been her advanced sniper instructor, a mentor who had recognized and nurtured her exceptional talent. The man who had once told her she was the most naturally gifted marksman he'd ever trained was now working for Maxwell, the architect of her downfall. "There's more," Westbrook added, her voice dropping lower. "Preliminary intelligence suggests Maxwell deliberately orchestrated the Damascus incident. Volkov wasn't just any CIA asset. He had uncovered evidence linking Maxwell to unauthorized arms sales to militant groups in Syria and Yemen. Evidence that would have exposed Maxwell as a traitor operating from within the agency. The revelation hit Morgan like a physical blow. For 3 years, she had lived with the belief that she had been sacrificed to protect institutional interests after an intelligence failure. The truth was far worse. She had been deliberately used as an instrument to eliminate a threat to Maxwell's criminal activities, then discarded when her usefulness ended. Maxwell knew exactly who Volkov was when he authorized your mission, Westbrook continued. He needed him eliminated before his evidence could be verified, and he needed someone to take the fall. You were the perfect combination, skilled enough to make the shot, junior enough to be expendable. How long have you known this? Morgan asked, her voice dangerously quiet. We've had suspicions for months, but concrete evidence only emerged when the SEALs uncovered financial transactions linking Maxwell to terrorist organizations during their current operation. That's why he's trying to eliminate them. They've found proof of what he did. To them, to you, to the country. The choice seemed clear now, even though the consequences remained unpredictable. This wasn't just about saving SEALs. This was about confronting the people who had orchestrated her downfall and betrayed their country. Send me the tactical situation in grid coordinates, Morgan said, her voice taking on the professional tone that had been dormant for 3 years. I'll need current intelligence on enemy positions, weather forecasts, and communication protocols for contact with the SEAL team. Morgan. Westbrook's voice carried a mixture of relief and concern. This is completely voluntary. No one will question your decision if you choose not to get involved. Morgan walked to the porch where Fitzgerald waited with patient understanding. The Barrett rifle seemed to be waiting as well, like a faithful partner ready to resume a relationship that had been interrupted by circumstances beyond either of their control. I'm not doing this for the Corps or the Navy, Morgan said firmly. I'm doing it for 24 men who didn't choose to be in this situation. And I'm doing it for myself. Maxwell has answers I need. Understood. Intelligence package is transmitting now. Good hunting, Shadow. As she ended the call, Fitzgerald stood and moved to the porch railing, his gaze fixed on the distant peaks where American servicemen were fighting for their lives against overwhelming odds. Guess that answers your question about what direction you're headed, he said quietly. Morgan began calculating equipment loads, route planning, and tactical considerations that would determine whether 24 SEALs lived or died before sunset. Sometimes you don't find your purpose, she said, slinging the Barrett rifle across her shoulder with movements that felt like greeting an old friend. Sometimes it finds you. I'm coming with you, Fitzgerald said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. Morgan started to protest, then saw the determination in the old ranger's eyes. This isn't your fight, Art. When I was younger than you are now, I was trapped behind enemy lines in Grenada, with 3 broken ribs and a bullet in my leg. His voice was matter-of-fact, devoid of any self-pity. A Marine sniper I'd never met kept the enemy at bay for 6 hours, until extraction arrived. Never knew his name. Never got to thank him. He checked the .45 caliber pistol holstered at his hip. Some debts you pay forward, not back. Inside her cabin, Morgan moved with mechanical precision through preparations she hadn't performed in 3 years. Each piece of equipment held specific purpose weight, calculated against tactical value. The Barrett M82A1 received first attention cleaning kit, scope adjustment tools, and match-grade ammunition sorted into protective cases. 47 rounds total, each cartridge capable of eliminating targets at distances exceeding 2,000 meters under optimal conditions. Fitzgerald watched from the doorway as she assembled her gear with the methodical care of a professional returning to deadly work. How much territory are we talking about? Devil's Backbone Valley covers roughly 12 square miles of granite cliffs, abandoned mining tunnels, and alpine forest. Morgan replied, sliding ceramic trauma plates into her tactical vest. Multiple elevation changes, limited visibility, perfect terrain for coordinated ambush tactics. Her hands moved through equipment selection without conscious thought, muscle memory overriding 3 years of civilian existence, rangefinder night vision scope climbing gear, emergency medical supplies, water purification tablets, high-energy rations, calculated for extended operations. Total pack weight, 63 pounds, manageable for someone who had maintained rigorous physical conditioning despite her exile. The satellite phone buzzed with incoming data transmission. Morgan connected her ruggedized tablet, downloading classified intelligence that painted a tactical picture worse than Westbrook's initial assessment suggested. 24 Navy SEALs from SEAL Team 7 had infiltrated Devil's Backbone Valley, targeting Harrison "the Serpent" Maxwell, the former CIA executive whose organization now supplied advanced weaponry to terrorist networks across 3 continents. Intelligence indicated Maxwell was conducting a major transaction involving stolen military hardware worth approximately $40 million. The operation had been planned as a standard capture or eliminate mission. SEAL teams would establish overwatch positions, identify high-value targets, and either extract Maxwell alive or eliminate him if extraction proved impossible. Simple, straightforward, executed successfully dozens of times by similar units. But Harrison Maxwell had earned his reputation through 15 years of surviving military and law enforcement attempts to neutralize his operations. The intelligence package revealed a man who possessed intimate knowledge of American special operations tactics, having overseen CIA operations in Iraq and Afghanistan before transitioning to illegal arms dealing. His organization included former Special Forces operators from multiple nations, creating a force capable of matching American tactical capabilities. Most concerning was the presence of Peter "Ghost" Lockwood, former Marine Force reconnaissance officer who had once been Morgan's advanced sniper instructor at Quantico. Lockwood knew her, knew how she thought, knew her tactics. If anyone could identify her presence on the battlefield from a single shot, it would be him. Morgan studied satellite imagery showing the abandoned Copper Creek mining complex, where the SEALs had established their defensive perimeter. 3 main buildings connected by covered walkways, surrounded by equipment yards and waste piles that provided some concealment but limited mobility. The complex sat in a natural bowl formation, surrounded by elevated positions that offered commanding views of every approach and escape route. Perfect killing ground, if someone controlled the high ground. Her radio crackled with encrypted communication from Colonel Westbrook. "Viper, this is Control. Current tactical update. SEAL team engaged for approximately 90 minutes. Casualties unknown, but intercepted communications indicate ammunition running low." Morgan keyed her microphone. "Control Viper. Request specific intelligence on enemy capabilities and positioning. Preliminary assessment suggests enemy force exceeding 150 personnel equipped with heavy machine guns, rocket-propelled grenades, and coordinated communication systems. They appear to have established overlapping fields of fire from multiple elevated positions around the mining complex." The tactical situation crystallized in Morgan's mind with uncomfortable clarity. The SEALs were trapped in a location with minimal cover, facing numerically superior forces that controlled every tactical advantage. Without immediate intervention, the outcome was predetermined. Control. What's the timeline for conventional support? Nearest available assets are minimum 8 hours out due to weather conditions and geographical constraints. You are the only qualified operator within effective range. Morgan finished her equipment check and slung the Barrett rifle across her shoulder. The weight felt familiar, comfortable, in a way that reminded her why she had once been considered among the Marine Corps' most capable snipers. Fitzgerald stepped aside as she moved toward the door. "You sure about this?" "No," Morgan replied honestly. "But those men didn't choose to be in that situation. Someone else made that decision for them. Same as happened to me." She stepped into the February cold breath immediately visible in air that carried the sharp bite of incoming weather. Visibility was deteriorating rapidly as snow clouds moved down from the higher elevations, which would complicate both her movement and target identification. The hike to Devil's Backbone Valley would require 3 hours of steady movement across terrain that challenged even experienced mountain climbers. Morgan had made similar journeys during her exile, mapping every possible route for situations she had hoped would never materialize. Now that theoretical preparation was about to face practical application under conditions where failure meant death for 24 Americans. Meanwhile, 6 miles northeast in Devil's Backbone Valley, Lieutenant Commander Jason "Razor" Peterson pressed his back against the concrete wall of the mining complex's main building, listening to automatic weapons fire that had continued almost without interruption for the past hour. At 34, Peterson had led SEAL operations in 7 countries, but he had never faced a tactical situation that offered fewer viable options. "Razor, this is Hammer. Alpha Team reports ammunition down to 60%. We've got wounded who need immediate medical attention." Chief Petty Officer Sam "Hammer" Clark's voice came through Peterson's earpiece, with the calm professionalism that marked veteran operators. At 36, Clark had served as Peterson's senior enlisted advisor for 4 years, developing the tactical partnership that allowed SEAL team operations to succeed despite impossible odds. Peterson closed his eyes, running through possibilities that all led to the same conclusion. They were trapped in a location with minimal tactical advantages, facing an enemy that appeared to know exactly how American Special Operations units responded to coordinated attacks. "Hammer, consolidate Alpha Team with Bravo in Building 2. We need to reduce our defensive perimeter before they overrun individual positions." Through the shattered windows of the complex, Peterson could see muzzle flashes from at least 12 different elevated positions. The enemy had established interlocking fields of fire that made movement between buildings extremely hazardous, while maintaining coordinated pressure that prevented the SEALs from establishing effective counterfire positions. Petty Officer Luke "Doc" Porter, the team's medic, crouched beside 2 wounded SEALs in the corner of the room. "Razor, I need to get Mitchell and Campbell to better cover. They're losing blood faster than I can replace it." Jake "Frost" Mitchell, the team's best marksman at 27, lay against the wall, his face pale beneath the tactical face paint. A piece of shrapnel had torn through his side during the initial engagement, and Porter's field dressings were already soaked through with blood. The tactical radio crackled with transmission from Firebase Echo, their supporting base of operations 40 miles southeast. "Viper 7, this is Echo Base. Situation report." Peterson grabbed the handset, knowing his response would likely be the last official communication these men would send. "Echo Base Viper 7. We are surrounded and heavily engaged by superior enemy forces. Estimated 150-plus hostiles with heavy weapons and coordinated tactics. Requesting immediate air support and extraction." Viper 7 negative on immediate air support. "Weather conditions prevent flight operations until dawn. You are on your own until morning." Dawn was still 5 hours away. Peterson looked around the room at men who had survived operations in some of the world's most dangerous locations. Warriors who had never faced a tactical situation this hopeless. They were running out of ammunition. Their wounded needed medical evacuation, and their defensive positions were being systematically eliminated by an enemy that seemed to anticipate every tactical decision they made. Petty Officer Second Class Ben Signal Hughes, Their communications specialist looked up from his radio equipment with an expression that confirmed Peterson's worst fears. "Sir, I'm picking up enemy communications in English. Professional terminology, military protocols. These aren't just random fighters. They know exactly what they're doing." The implications hit Peterson immediately. Harrison Maxwell hadn't just prepared for the possibility of American military intervention. He had recruited personnel specifically capable of countering SEAL team tactics. This wasn't an ambush. It was a carefully orchestrated trap designed to eliminate an entire American Special Operations unit. Above the mining complex, Peter Lockwood observed the engagement through military-grade binoculars from his position on Ridgeline Alpha. The former Marine Force reconnaissance officer had spent 18 months planning this operation, studying American Special Operations protocols and identifying weaknesses that could be exploited by a well-prepared defensive force. "All positions, this is Overwatch," Lockwood spoke into his tactical radio. "SEAL team is consolidating into Building 2. Adjust fire concentration accordingly." Lockwood had served alongside American Special Operations Forces for 6 years before discovering that patriotism paid significantly less than pragmatism. Harrison Maxwell offered compensation that made military service seem like volunteer work, along with operational freedom that allowed Lockwood to apply his tactical knowledge without political constraints. The mining complex below was illuminated by muzzle flashes from both sides. But the tactical mathematics were simple. American forces were depleting their ammunition reserves while defending static positions against mobile attackers who controlled every advantage. The outcome was predetermined unless something changed the fundamental equation. As he watched the systematic destruction of an American Special Operations team, Lockwood felt an unexpected twinge of something he hadn't experienced in years. Not quite regret, but a distant echo of the man he had once been. A man who had believed in principles beyond personal profit. A man who had trained operators like Morgan Sullivan, instilling in them the values he himself had abandoned. He pushed the thought away. This was business, and sentiment had no place in it. Yet, he couldn't help remembering Sullivan's face when she'd qualified for sniper school. The intense focus, the natural talent, the absolute dedication to perfection. She had been his finest student, and he had followed her career with quiet pride until Damascus. Damascus. The mission that had destroyed her career while solidifying his own relationship with Maxwell. Lockwood had been the one who had identified Sullivan as the perfect instrument for Maxwell's plan, skilled enough to make the impossible shot, junior enough to be expendable afterward. He had never intended for her career to be destroyed. That had been Maxwell's addition to the plan, ensuring she would be too discredited to ever pose a threat. "Boss, this is Position 3, came the voice of Viktor Skar Petrov, one of Lockwood's squad leaders. "Americans are pulling back to secondary positions. Should we advance? Negative. Maintain current positions and continue coordinated fire. Let them exhaust their ammunition trying to defend positions that can't be held. Time is on our side." Lockwood understood American military psychology better than the Americans themselves. SEAL teams were trained to never surrender, never retreat, never abandon wounded teammates. Those admirable qualities became tactical liabilities when facing an enemy willing to exploit them systematically. The snow was intensifying, reducing visibility, and creating additional complications for both sides. But Lockwood's forces held every significant advantage, including detailed knowledge of terrain features that American intelligence hadn't identified. Victory was simply a matter of patience and professional execution. In the mining complex, Peterson made a decision that violated every principle of SEAL team tactics, but offered their only chance of survival. He keyed his radio for transmission on emergency frequencies monitored by all American military units in the region. Any station, any station. This is SEAL Team 7. We are trapped in Devil's Backbone Valley and require immediate assistance from any available personnel. Grid coordinates follow. The transmission went out into the Montana wilderness, a desperate plea for help from operators who had never before found themselves in a situation where their training and equipment weren't sufficient to ensure mission success. 6 miles southwest, Morgan Sullivan heard that transmission through her portable radio as she navigated the treacherous approach to Devil's Backbone Valley. She increased her pace, pushing through snow and across rocky terrain that demanded complete attention to avoid fatal mistakes. 24 men were counting on her skills whether they knew it or not. Behind her, Fitzgerald followed his decades of mountain experience, evident in the precise placement of each step. The old ranger had insisted on accompanying her as far as her first observation post, promising to provide rear security and communication relay if needed. "When I was at Fort Benning teaching snipers," Fitzgerald said as they paused briefly for water, "I used to tell them that a good sniper isn't the one who makes the most impressive shot. It's the one who makes the right shot at the right time." He studied Morgan's face for a moment. "You always understood that better than most." Morgan nodded, appreciating the vote of confidence. "The right shot isn't always the most difficult one." "No," Fitzgerald agreed. "Sometimes it's the one no one else is willing to take." They continued their ascent, the conversation falling away as the terrain demanded their full attention. Morgan's boots found purchase on ice-covered granite as she navigated a near-vertical section of ridgeline that most climbers would consider impassable in daylight, let alone during a snowstorm. Each handhold required testing before committing her full weight, while the Barrett rifle's additional bulk shifted her center of gravity in ways that demanded constant adjustment. One mistake would send her tumbling 300 feet down a rocky slope that offered no chance of survival. The temperature had dropped 15 degrees in the past hour, turning her breath into frozen crystals that clung to her tactical face mask. Visibility deteriorated with each passing minute as the storm intensified. But Morgan pressed forward using navigation skills learned during survival training that few Marines ever experienced. She had memorized this route during countless solo hiking expeditions, never imagining those peaceful explorations would become life-or-death reconnaissance for a combat mission. Her portable radio crackled with fragmentary transmissions from the valley below. American voices strained and desperate, reporting ammunition counts that grew smaller with each update. The professional calm that marked experienced operators was beginning to crack under pressure that exceeded anything in their training or operational experience. "Bravo, team, we need covering fire for casualty evacuation." The voice belonged to someone young, probably mid-20s, speaking with the controlled panic of a warrior facing his first encounter with mortality. Morgan increased her pace, ignoring the burning sensation in her lungs, as thin mountain air challenged her cardiovascular system. Each step brought her closer to positions where her rifle could influence the engagement. But those same steps represented time that the trapped SEALs might not possess. Fitzgerald was keeping pace, his breathing steady despite the exertion. Decades of experience had taught him to conserve energy even during rapid movement. His eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, alert for any signs of enemy scouts or patrols that might have been deployed to secure the high ground. "Approaching Eagle's Perch," Morgan said quietly, referencing a distinctive rock formation that offered excellent sight lines to the valley below. "I'll establish my first position there." Fitzgerald nodded. "I'll set up overwatch 50 meters back. Give you early warning if company comes calling." Morgan checked her watch. 2 hours had passed since they'd left the cabin. The SEALs had been engaged for over 3 hours now, their situation deteriorating with each passing minute. She needed to reach a firing position soon if her intervention was to make any difference. In Building 2 of the mining complex, Petty Officer 3rd Class Ian "Fresh" Palmer pressed his back against a concrete support pillar while automatic weapons fire shredded the air where his head had been moments earlier. At 23, Palmer was the newest member of SEAL Team 7 selected for this mission based on his exceptional marksmanship scores and demonstrated ability to maintain composure under extreme stress. Those qualifications felt inadequate now as he watched Petty Officer Jake "Frost" Mitchell bleeding heavily from shrapnel wounds that Petty Officer Luke "Doc" Porter was struggling to treat with limited medical supplies. "Fresh, can you get eyes on the machine gun position at 10 o'clock? Lieutenant Commander Peterson's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question, but Palmer could detect underlying tension that acknowledged their deteriorating tactical situation. Palmer eased his rifle around the concrete pillar using his scope to scan enemy positions that seemed to multiply with each observation. "I count 3 separate firing positions, all elevated, all with overlapping fields of fire. They've got us completely zeroed." The tactical implications were devastating. The enemy had established what military strategists called a kill zone, an area where every piece of cover could be engaged simultaneously from multiple directions. Moving between buildings meant exposure to coordinated fire that guaranteed casualties. Remaining in current positions meant slow elimination as ammunition supplies dwindled. Chief Petty Officer Sam "Hammer" Clark crawled across the debris-covered floor to Peterson's position, his movement timed to coincide with their own suppressive fire. "Razor Charlie Team reports they're down to 40 rounds per man. Delta Team lost Rodriguez when they tried to establish overwatch on the eastern approach." Palmer felt his chest tighten at the mention of Petty Officer Dan "Venom" Rodriguez, who had been positioned with another SEAL in the complex's eastern building when coordinated RPG fire had eliminated that position entirely. 2 experienced operators gone in seconds, their tactical expertise neutralized by an enemy that seemed to anticipate every SEAL team doctrine. Sir Palmer said, his voice steady, despite the fear that threatened to paralyze rational thinking. "What if we're not dealing with random fighters? What if someone planned this specifically to counter our tactics?" Peterson's expression confirmed what Palmer had begun to suspect. This wasn't an ambush. It was a carefully orchestrated trap, designed by someone with intimate knowledge of American Special Operations procedures. Above the complex, Peter Lockwood monitored multiple radio frequencies while coordinating fire from positions that covered every possible escape route. His tactical display showed SEAL team positions, ammunition estimates, and casualty reports that painted a picture of systematic destruction proceeding exactly as planned. Position 4, adjust fire 30 meters north. Americans are trying to establish new covering positions. Copy overwatch. Adjusting fire. Lockwood's organization included former military personnel from 6 countries, each selected for specific capabilities that complemented American tactical weaknesses. Russian Spetsnaz operators provided expertise in coordinated assault techniques. British SAS veterans contributed reconnaissance and surveillance skills. German GSG-9 specialists offered precision marksmanship from elevated positions. Most importantly, Lockwood himself provided strategic knowledge gained from 18 months of detailed study focused on eliminating American Special Operations capabilities. He had analyzed after-action reports, studied training protocols, and identified psychological patterns that could be exploited by a determined enemy with superior positioning and numerical advantages. "Boss, American communications are getting more desperate," reported Victor Scar Petrov from Position 3. "Should we consider advancing for final assault? Negative. Maintain current fire discipline. Let them exhaust their ammunition trying to defend positions that cannot be held. Time is on our side." Behind Lockwood, the door to the command bunker opened. Harrison Maxwell stepped out, his tall frame silhouetted against the artificial light. At 53, the former CIA deputy director retained the sharp features and calculating gaze that had made him both respected and feared within the intelligence community. "Peter, report." Lockwood turned, offering a brief nod that acknowledged Maxwell's authority without the formality of a salute. Their relationship was built on mutual respect and shared cynicism about the institutions they had once served. Proceeding exactly as planned. Americans are trapped, running low on ammunition and accumulating casualties they can't evacuate. I estimate total elimination within the next 2 hours. Maxwell nodded, his expression revealing nothing. And our perimeter security, standard protocol. Patrols covering all approaches, observation posts on every significant elevation. Nothing gets within 3 miles without us knowing. Good. Maxwell studied the tactical display for a moment. I want confirmation when the last American is dead. Documentary evidence for our clients. They're paying a premium to see SEAL Team 7 eliminated. The implication was clear. This wasn't just about arms dealing. It was about demonstrating capabilities to potential clients who valued proof that American Special Operations teams could be defeated through proper planning and execution. Understood, Lockwood replied, returning his attention to the tactical display. We'll have video documentation from multiple angles. As Maxwell returned to the command bunker, Lockwood felt another twinge of discomfort. The former CIA executive had crossed lines that even Lockwood found disturbing. Maxwell wasn't just selling arms to America's enemies. He was actively helping them develop tactics to counter American military capabilities. He was selling out his country for profit, and Lockwood had become complicit in treason. It was too late for second thoughts. Lockwood had cast his lot with Maxwell 3 years ago when he'd helped identify Morgan Sullivan as the perfect instrument for eliminating Volkov. The CIA asset had been getting too close to Maxwell's illegal operations, uncovering evidence that would have exposed his side business selling arms to militant groups while still serving as deputy director. Lockwood had suggested using Sullivan for the hit, knowing her exceptional skills would guarantee success. What he hadn't anticipated was Maxwell's ruthlessness afterward. Sullivan was supposed to be reassigned, perhaps with a reprimand, for failing to verify her target. Instead, Maxwell had engineered her complete destruction, ensuring she could never piece together the truth about Damascus. It was the first time Lockwood had glimpsed the true nature of the man he had tied his future to. Morgan Sullivan reached Eagle's Perch, a granite outcropping that provided excellent cover while offering sightlines to the valley below. The position was 1,847 meters from the mining complex, well within the effective range of her Barrett M82A1, but far enough to minimize counter-sniper threat. She carefully set up her firing position, anchoring the rifle's bipod on the stone surface and arranging her body in perfect alignment behind the weapon. Wind velocity measured 12 miles per hour from the northwest, requiring compensation calculations that had become instinctive during her years as a Marine Scout sniper. Through her scope, the mining complex appeared as a tactical chessboard where American warriors were being systematically eliminated by an enemy that controlled every advantage. Her breathing slowed to the controlled rhythm that preceded precision shots at extreme range. Heart rate decreased as combat focus eliminated all awareness except the crosshair's target and mathematical relationship between bullet trajectory and terminal ballistics. The familiar weight of the rifle felt like greeting an old partner after an unwanted separation. Range to primary target, 1,847 meters. Atmospheric conditions challenging but manageable. Wind compensation, 3/4 value left. Target assessment, enemy machine gun position on Ridgeline Alpha, currently engaging American forces with devastating effect. Morgan's finger found the trigger with gentle pressure, that had been perfected through thousands of practice rounds and dozens of confirmed kills in 7 countries. The mathematics were complex, but the execution had to be flawless. One shot to announce her presence and change the tactical equation. Miss in her position would be compromised without achieving any tactical advantage. In the mining complex below, Lieutenant Commander Peterson raised his hand to signal the coordinated breakout attempt that represented their only remaining chance of survival. Around him, 17 remaining SEALs prepared for movement that would expose them to coordinated fire from multiple directions. The wounded would be carried equipment, would be abandoned, and survival would depend on speed, surprise, and the desperate courage of warriors who had never learned how to surrender. "On my mark," Peterson whispered into his tactical radio. "Alpha Team breaks north toward the equipment yard. Bravo Team provides covering fire, then follows 30 seconds behind. Charlie Team maintains overwatch until both elements reach secondary positions." Petty Officer First Class Joe Blast Warren. The team's explosives expert crouched near the eastern window with demolition charges that could eliminate the building's structural supports if enemy forces attempted to storm their position. At 31, Warren had served with SEAL teams for 9 years, participating in operations that officially never happened in countries the Pentagon preferred not to acknowledge publicly. "Razor, those machine gun positions are going to chew us apart the moment we break cover," Warren said, his voice carrying the calm assessment of someone who understood that professional evaluation of hopeless situations was preferable to false optimism. Peterson nodded, knowing Warren's tactical analysis was accurate but irrelevant. Remaining in current positions guaranteed slow elimination as ammunition supplies reached 0. Movement offered minimal chance of success, but minimal was preferable to none. Above the complex, Morgan's crosshairs settled on the enemy machine gunner, who had been systematically suppressing American attempts to establish effective return fire. Professional observation revealed disciplined fire control, coordinated communication with other positions, and tactical knowledge that marked former military training. This wasn't random resistance. It was coordinated elimination of American special operations capabilities by personnel with equivalent expertise. Time slowed as Morgan's finger applied final pressure to the trigger. 3 years of exile, disgrace, and self-doubt focused into a single moment that would determine whether 24 Americans lived or died in the next hour. The Barrett Rifles report echoed across Devil's Backbone Valley like thunder. The .50 caliber round traversed nearly 2 kilometers of mountain air before finding its target with terminal precision that ended the machine gun's devastating effectiveness instantly. Through her scope, Morgan observed the immediate tactical impact. Enemy communications increased in volume and urgency as professional fighters responded to unexpected threat from an impossible direction. Muzzle flashes shifted orientation as multiple positions attempted to locate and eliminate the sniper, who had just changed the fundamental equation of their carefully orchestrated trap. "Control, this is Viper," Morgan transmitted, while rapidly changing position to avoid counter-sniper fire. "First target eliminated. SEAL team should execute movement now while enemy forces are adjusting to new threat parameters." In the mining complex, Peterson had witnessed the impossible shot that eliminated their most dangerous immediate threat. Professional warriors didn't believe in miracles, but they recognized tactical opportunities when superior firepower provided temporary advantage. "All teams execute breakout now," Peterson commanded, rising from cover and leading Alpha Team toward the equipment yard in a desperate sprint that exposed them to fire from multiple directions. Above the valley, Lockwood heard the distinctive sound of the Barrett rifle and instantly recognized its implications. Only one person in the region could make that shot under these conditions. All positions, we have sniper contact from unknown location. He transmitted urgently. Adjust defensive posture and initiate counter-sniper protocols immediately. As Lockwood scanned the surrounding mountains through his binoculars, a cold certainty formed in his mind. He knew exactly who had just announced their presence on his battlefield. Morgan Sullivan, his most promising student from Quantico, the one who had broken every record during advanced sniper training. The one whose career he had followed until the Damascus incident had erased her from official records. The ghost had returned to haunt them all. The snow had begun to fall harder as Morgan repositioned herself 50 meters east of her initial firing point. Professional snipers never fired twice from the same location, especially when facing opponents with counter-sniper capabilities. The shot that had eliminated the machine gun position had bought the SEAL team precious minutes, but it had also announced her presence to an enemy force that would now actively hunt for her. Through her scope, Morgan watched the SEAL team's desperate sprint across open ground toward the mining complex's equipment yard. Chief Petty Officer Clark coordinated covering fire, while Lieutenant Commander Peterson led the main element. Two SEALs carried a wounded teammate between them, his legs dragging uselessly through the snow. "Control, this is Viper," Morgan transmitted, keeping her voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "SEAL team is mobile, moving to secondary positions. I count at least 8 enemy spotters adjusting focus to search for my position. Preparing for second engagement." Colonel Westbrook's response came through clearly, despite the storm interference. "Copy, Viper. Be advised that satellite thermal imaging shows enemy forces deploying mobile teams toward elevated positions. They're hunting you." "Understood, Control." Morgan had expected nothing less. Proceeding with target elimination based on tactical priority. Above her position, concealed among a cluster of weather-beaten pines, Master Sergeant Fitzgerald maintained overwatch through military-grade binoculars. His decades of experience had taught him to recognize patterns of movement that would be invisible to less experienced observers. 3-man teams were spreading out across the ridgelines, moving with the disciplined efficiency that marked professional operators. "Shadow, you've got visitors coming," Fitzgerald reported through their encrypted channel. 2 teams moving up the eastern slope, another working the western approach. Professional formation maintaining comms discipline. These aren't amateurs. Morgan acknowledged with a double click of her transmit button, already calculating her next move. She needed to eliminate another high-value target before repositioning again. Each shot would draw more attention, increasing the risk exponentially. But without continued precision, fire support, the SEAL team would never reach defensible positions. In the valley below, Peter Lockwood's voice cut through the tactical communication channels with cold precision. "All elements, this is Overwatch. Shift primary focus to counter-sniper operations. I want that shooter identified and eliminated within the next 15 minutes." He studied the surrounding mountains through his tactical glasses, methodically analyzing each potential firing position. The shot that had eliminated their machine gun nest had come from the northeast quadrant, somewhere along the ridgeline, Americans called Eagle's Perch, range approximately 1,800 to 2,000 meters. A difficult shot under optimal conditions, nearly impossible in the current weather. Only a handful of snipers in the world could make that shot. One of them was Morgan Sullivan. Lockwood keyed his radio again. "Blade team, focus your search on the northeast ridgeline. Look for concealment that offers sight lines to multiple defensive positions. Our sniper is female 5'8" auburn hair, likely using a Barrett M82A1. Former Marine Scout sniper with extensive mountain warfare training. Dmitry Blade Klov, the Russian Spetsnaz veteran, leading Lockwood's counter-sniper element, responded immediately. "Overwatch, you have positive identification on the shooter. High probability. Gunnery Sergeant Morgan Sullivan, call sign Shadow, former student of mine at Quantico, holds the Marine Corps record for confirmed kills beyond 1,500 meters. Clove processed this information with professional interest. American sniper woman, living in these mountains. Affirmative. Local intelligence suggests she's been inhabiting a remote cabin somewhere in the northern sector. Knows these mountains better than our recon teams. Understood. We will find her. Clove's voice carried the confidence of a man who had hunted human targets across 3 continents. Dead or alive? Lockwood hesitated, his thumb hovering over the transmit button. Maxwell's standard protocol would be immediate elimination. Sullivan represented a significant threat, given her skills and potential knowledge about Damascus. But something held him back. Alive if possible, he finally replied. Maxwell will want to interrogate her regarding military knowledge of our operation. It wasn't entirely a lie. Maxwell would certainly want to question Sullivan before eliminating her, but Lockwood's motivation went deeper. The thought of ordering the immediate execution of his former student, someone whose talent he had personally nurtured, sat uncomfortably even after 3 years of moral compromise. But don't take unnecessary risks, he added. She's exceptionally dangerous. Inside the command bunker, Harris and Maxwell studied the tactical display with growing concern. The precision elimination of their primary machine gun position had disrupted the carefully orchestrated suppression fire that had been containing the SEAL team. Now the Americans were mobile, moving toward positions that offered improved defensive capabilities. One sniper shouldn't be able to change the tactical equation so dramatically. But Maxwell had read the classified reports on Morgan Sullivan. 46 confirmed kills in combat operations, 17 beyond 1,500 meters. The highest qualification scores ever recorded at Quantico's Advanced Sniper School. More concerning was her personal motivation. Maxwell had been the one who had signed off on the Damascus operation, knowing that Alexander Volkov was an active CIA asset. He had authorized the mission specifically to eliminate Volkov, who had discovered evidence linking Maxwell to illegal arms shipments even while undercover. Sullivan had been the perfect instrument, a skilled operator who would take the fall when everything went wrong. Now that same instrument had reappeared at the worst possible moment, threatening an operation worth millions to his organization. "Get me a secure line to our asset at Langley," Maxwell ordered his communications specialist. "We need to know exactly what Westbrook told Sullivan and what other resources might be heading our way." The specialist worked his equipment for several minutes before looking up with an expression that Maxwell immediately recognized as bad news. "Tamir, our Langley asset reports Colonel Westbrook accessed classified files on Operation Damascus earlier today. Files specifically related to your authorization of the Volkov elimination." Maxwell's face hardened as he processed the implications. If Westbrook had found evidence linking him to the deliberate elimination of a CIA asset, she might have shared that information with Sullivan. Which meant this wasn't just a random intervention to save the SEALs. It was potentially a mission of personal vengeance. "Increase priority on Sullivan's elimination," Maxwell ordered, "and prepare contingency protocols for immediate evacuation if the tactical situation deteriorates further." In the equipment yard of the mining complex, Lieutenant Commander Peterson directed his men to establish a defensive perimeter that maximized their limited ammunition and personnel. The unexpected sniper support had given them breathing room, but their tactical situation remained precarious. "Signal any contact with our guardian angel," Peterson asked, turning to Petty Officer Ben Hughes, who was monitoring their communication equipment. "Negative, sir. Whoever it is, they're maintaining communication discipline. Only transmitting to someone on an encrypted channel our gear can't access." Chief Clark approached his weathered face, showing the strain of the past 4 hours of continuous combat. Razor Mitchell's condition is deteriorating. Doc says he needs surgical intervention within the next 2 hours or we're going to lose him. Peterson nodded grimly. Jake Frost Mitchell was not only one of their best operators, but also a close friend who had saved Peterson's life during an operation gone wrong in Yemen. Losing him would impact team morale at a time when they needed every ounce of determination to survive. Keep him stable as long as possible. That sniper bought us time, but we're still a long way from home. Peterson surveyed their new position critically. Fresh take hammer and set up observation posts covering the northern and eastern approaches. I want early warning if they try to rush us. Petty Officer Ian Palmer nodded, accepting the responsibility despite his relative inexperience. At 23, he was the youngest member of the team, but the past 4 hours had aged him in ways that training never could. He had watched 2 teammates die already. The prospect of losing Mitchell as well felt like a personal failure, even though rationally he knew there was nothing he could have done differently. "Sir, if I may—" Palmer hesitated, gathering his thoughts. That shot that took out their machine gun. 2,000 meters in a snowstorm with that wind. There aren't many people who could make that shot. Peterson understood what Palmer was suggesting. You think it's Morgan Sullivan, the ghost of Firebase Lima, the sniper they erased after Damascus. Palmer had heard the rumors like everyone in the special operations community. Last intelligence put her somewhere in Montana, living off the grid. If it is Sullivan, we just got the luckiest break since this operation went to hell. Peterson's expression hardened. But don't count on continued support. Sullivan has every reason to hate the military after what happened to her. Clark nodded in agreement. The Corps hung her out to dry, made her the scapegoat for an intelligence failure that went all the way to Langley. If I were her, I wouldn't piss on a military operation if it was on fire. And yet here she is, Peterson said quietly. Let's make sure her intervention isn't wasted. On the ridgeline, Morgan had identified her second high-value target, a forward observer coordinating mortar fire from a concealed position 200 meters from her location. The shot would be even more challenging than her first, with the wind now gusting to 15 miles per hour and visibility deteriorating as the snow intensified. She made the necessary adjustments to her scope, compensating for environmental factors that would affect the bullet's trajectory over such an extreme distance. Her breathing slowed to the measured rhythm of a professional marksman, heart rate dropping as she entered the hyper-focused state that elite snipers called the bubble. Inside the bubble, nothing existed except the crosshairs, the target, and the mathematical relationship between them. Not the cold numbing her fingers, not the enemy teams hunting her position, not the memories of Damascus that had haunted her for 3 years. Just the shot. The Barrett's thunderous report shattered the mountain silence again. The .50 caliber round traveled for nearly 3 seconds before striking the forward observer with devastating precision, eliminating both the target and the sophisticated equipment he had been using to direct mortar fire against the SEAL team's new position. "Control, this is Viper," Morgan transmitted as she immediately began breaking down her equipment. "Second target eliminated. Forward observer directing mortar fire. SEAL team should have reduced indirect fire threat for the next 10 to 15 minutes while they reorganize." "Copy, Viper," Westbrook replied. "Excellent work. Be advised that Signals Intelligence has detected increased enemy communication regarding counter-sniper operations. They appear to have identified you specifically." Morgan paused, processing this information. "Clarify, identified specifically." "Intercepts include your name, physical description, and equipment details. Someone in their command structure knows exactly who you are." Lockwood. It had to be. Her former instructor would recognize her shooting style, would know her preferences for distance and target selection. The realization sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the freezing temperature. Understood control, implementing counter-pursuit measures and relocating to position Charlie. As Morgan finished securing her equipment, Fitzgerald's voice came through her earpiece with urgent intensity. Shadow multiple hostiles approaching your previous position from the west. 3-man team moving tactically. Less than 300 meters and closing. Copy. Exfiltrating eastern route to position Charlie. Maintain overwatch and rejoin at Rally Point Baker. Solid copy. Watch your 6. Morgan moved through the forest with the silent efficiency that had earned her call sign. Each step was carefully placed to minimize sound and avoid leaving obvious tracks in the accumulating snow. The Barrett, broken down and secured in its carrying case, rode across her back, while her sidearm remained within easy reach. The storm was both ally and enemy now. It concealed her movement from visual observation, but made thermal detection more effective due to the temperature differential between her body and the surrounding environment. The teams hunting her would be using advanced optics specifically designed to detect heat signatures in adverse conditions. She needed to reach the cave system on the eastern slope before they closed the net around her position. The natural formations would mask her thermal signature while providing multiple exit points that only someone intimately familiar with the mountain would know existed. 3 years of solitary exploration were about to pay dividends in ways she had never anticipated when mapping these mountains out of sheer boredom and tactical habit. In the command bunker, Maxwell received confirmation that Sullivan had been positively identified as the sniper disrupting their operation. The news triggered both anger and opportunity in equal measure. "So the disgraced hero returns," he mused, studying the topographical display showing search team positions. "Lockwood, what's your assessment of Sullivan's capabilities in the current environment?" Peter Lockwood considered the question carefully, weighing professional respect against operational necessity. "She's among the top 3 snipers I've ever trained. Outstanding fieldcraft, exceptional marksmanship, superior tactical awareness. In these mountains, with her local knowledge, she represents a significant threat to our operation." "And yet she's one person against over 100 professional operators," Maxwell countered. "A skilled sniper doesn't need to defeat an entire force," Lockwood replied. "They just need to eliminate key personnel and disrupt command and control functions. Sullivan knows this. She's targeting our force multipliers, machine gun positions, forward observers, communication specialists. Textbook asymmetric warfare against a superior force." Maxwell nodded, processing this assessment. "Then we need to change her calculation. Make this personal rather than tactical." He turned to his communication specialist. "Broadcast on all frequencies, including the encrypted channels the military uses. I want Sullivan to hear this." The specialist adjusted the equipment, then nodded to indicate they were transmitting. "Morgan Sullivan," Maxwell began, his voice carrying the smooth authority that had once commanded CIA operations across 3 continents. "This is Harrison Maxwell. I believe we have unfinished business from Damascus." In her carefully chosen position among the rocks, Morgan froze as Maxwell's voice came through her radio. The casual mention of Damascus sent a surge of anger through her body, hot enough to momentarily banish the mountain cold. "I want to congratulate you on those 2 shots. Impressive work, especially given the conditions. But I think it's time we had an honest conversation about what you're trying to accomplish here." Morgan maintained radio silence, knowing that responding would only provide data for direction-finding equipment to locate her transmission source, but she couldn't stop herself from listening. "You were never meant to be the scapegoat, you know. You were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Volkov had discovered something he shouldn't have, and Damascus provided the perfect opportunity to eliminate the problem. Your involvement was incidental. The casual dismissal of her destroyed career as incidental caused Morgan's grip to tighten on her rifle. 3 years of exile, friends who had abandoned her, a reputation in ruins, all incidental to Maxwell's schemes. I'm prepared to offer you something no one else can, Morgan. The complete truth about Damascus, the unredacted files, the names of everyone involved in the decision chain, everything you need to clear your name. All you have to do is cease your current intervention and walk away. The offer hung in the freezing air, tempting in its simplicity. The truth was all she had wanted for 3 years. The chance to restore her reputation, to have her service recognized rather than condemned. But 24 American servicemen were still trapped in the valley below, depending on her to keep them alive until extraction arrived. Men who had nothing to do with the political games that had destroyed her career. Think about it, Morgan, Maxwell continued. Those SEALs aren't your responsibility. They're just another team sent into an impossible situation by the same system that sacrificed you without a second thought. Why risk your life for an organization that discarded you so easily? Morgan keyed her microphone, breaking her silence despite the tactical risk. Maxwell, this is Viper. Here's my counteroffer. Surrender your forces, release the SEAL team, and I'll consider asking them to take you alive. A moment of silence followed before Maxwell's laughter came through the channel. I see you haven't lost your spirit. Admirable, but misguided. Let me be clear. There are now 15 professional operators specifically tasked with hunting you down. Unlike the SEALs, they know these mountains almost as well as you do. And they have no rules of engagement restricting their methods. I've spent the last 3 years preparing for people like you to come looking for me, Morgan replied, already moving from her position in case they were tracking her transmission. How long have you prepared for someone like me, hunting you? With that final statement, she cut communication and focused on reaching position Charlie. A natural cave formation that offered both concealment and firing angles covering the mining complex's eastern approach. The cave system extended deep into the mountain with multiple exit points that would allow her to evade pursuers even if her primary position was compromised. As she moved through the forest, a new determination filled her. Maxwell had unwittingly given her something she had lacked for 3 years' purpose. The knowledge that her ruination hadn't been just an institutional failure, but a deliberate act orchestrated by specific individuals who could be held accountable. First, though, she needed to keep those SEALs alive. In the equipment yard, Peterson received the unexpected communication from Morgan with a mixture of surprise and professional appreciation. The transmission had been brief, just coordinates for a planned exfiltration route and a request for synchronized action within the next 30 minutes, but it confirmed what he had suspected. Morgan Sullivan, the ghost of Firebase Lima, was indeed their guardian angel. Signal acknowledge receipt and confirm our readiness to coordinate, Peterson ordered, turning to Hughes. Let her know we have wounded, requiring immediate evacuation once we break contact. As Hughes transmitted the confirmation, Chief Clark approached with an update on Mitchell's condition. Doc's done everything he can, but Mitchell's fading fast. Internal bleeding, probable damaged spleen. He needs surgery in the next hour, or we're going to lose him. Peterson nodded grimly. Then Sullivan's timing couldn't be better. She's creating a diversion on the eastern perimeter. When their forces respond, we make our move toward the western extraction point. Sir, with all due respect, Palmer interrupted. That's at least 2 miles of open terrain, and we've got wounded who can't move under their own power. I'm aware of the challenges, fresh, Peterson replied without heat. but Sullivan is giving us our only shot at extraction. We're going to take it." He turned to address the assembled operators. "Hammer, organize 4-man teams to carry our wounded. Blast, I need you to prepare demolition charges as we withdraw. Delayed detonation, maximum confusion." As the team prepared for their desperate breakout attempt, Peterson found himself wondering about the woman who had intervened so unexpectedly in their operation. Morgan Sullivan's reputation had become almost mythical in certain circles of the special operations community, the perfect shot, who had been sacrificed to political expediency, the ghost, who had disappeared into the wilderness rather than fight a system rigged against her. And now, for reasons he couldn't fully understand, she was risking her life to save theirs. Above the valley, Morgan reached Position Charlie and quickly established her firing position within the cave entrance. The natural formation provided excellent concealment while offering a clear line of sight to the eastern approach of the mining complex. More importantly, it masked her thermal signature from the teams now actively hunting her. Through her scope, she could see increased enemy movement, as search teams spread across the ridgelines in systematic patterns designed to flush out a hidden sniper. They were good moving in coordinated fire teams, maintaining overlapping fields of observation using terrain features for concealment, while avoiding skylines that would silhouette them against the horizon. The kind of operators who would normally give Morgan pause. But these mountains had been her home, her training ground, her sanctuary for 3 years. She knew every ridge, every ravine, every hidden path that didn't appear on any map. More importantly, she knew exactly what Maxwell valued most in his operation. Not the foot soldiers combing the mountains for her, not even the specialist teams coordinating the ambush against the SEALs. No, Maxwell would be protected by his best personnel in the command bunker directing operations from a position of relative safety. Taking him out would create exactly the kind of chaos the SEALs needed for their extraction attempt. But the command bunker was over 2,000 meters from her position, partially obscured by terrain features, and would be heavily defended. It would require the most difficult shot of her career under conditions that pushed the boundaries of what was physically possible. "Control, this is Viper," Morgan transmitted, keeping her voice low despite the unlikelihood of being overheard inside the cave. "I've identified the enemy command post. Appears to be a reinforced bunker on the southwestern ridge, requesting any available intelligence on the structure and personnel." Colonel Westbrook's response came through clearly. "Viper satellite imaging confirms a hardened structure at that location. Thermal signatures suggest approximately 8 to 10 personnel inside. Intelligence indicates that's likely Maxwell's command post. Copy, Control. I'm preparing to engage high-value targets at that location to create a diversion for SEAL team extraction. Have coordinated timing with ground forces." "Understood, Viper. Be advised that weather conditions are showing minimal improvement. Earliest possible air support is still 3 hours out." 3 hours. Morgan calculated ammunition position, sustainability, and enemy response capabilities. The SEALs needed to move now, while Maxwell's forces were focused on hunting her rather than containing them. And they needed a significant distraction to improve their chances of reaching the extraction point. Copy, Control. Executing in 10 minutes. As Morgan made her final preparations, adjusting her scope for the extreme distance and challenging environmental conditions, Fitzgerald's voice came through her earpiece. "Shadow, be advised, I've got eyes on a 3-man team approaching your position from the northwest. Professional movement using terrain for concealment. Estimate they'll reach your location in approximately 15 minutes. Copy, old man. Executing primary mission objective, then displacing immediately. Rally at Point Baker as planned." Morgan focused on her breathing, slowing her heart rate as she prepared for the most challenging shot of her career. Range to target, 2,300 innings. meters. Environmental conditions near whiteout, with wind gusting to 18 miles per hour. Target a partially obscured entrance where personnel occasionally appeared when entering or exiting the command bunker. She would have one chance, one shot, to create the chaos necessary for 24 Americans to escape with their lives. Through her scope, Morgan observed a figure emerging from the bunker entrance. Tall, distinguished, moving with the confident authority of someone accustomed to command. Harrison Maxwell himself stepping out to survey the battlefield where his forces were systematically eliminating an American Special Operations team. The man who had orchestrated her downfall, who had sacrificed her career without a second thought, and who had dismissed 3 years of her life as incidental to his schemes. Morgan's finger found the trigger, applying steady pressure as her crosshairs settled on Maxwell's chest. The distance was extreme, the conditions nearly impossible. But as Fitzgerald had reminded her earlier, a good sniper isn't the one who makes the most impressive shot. It's the one who makes the right shot at the right time. And there would never be a more right time than this. The Barrett's thunderous report echoed through the cave as the .50 caliber round began its 3-second journey toward a target so distant that Maxwell wouldn't even hear the shot before the bullet found him. In the command bunker's entrance, Maxwell felt the impact before his brain registered the sound. The .50 caliber round struck with devastating force, throwing him backward through the doorway as security personnel reacted with professional urgency, dragging him inside while returning fire toward a threat they couldn't locate. Through her scope, Morgan observed the immediate chaos as Maxwell's protective detail scrambled to respond. The shot had struck true, but she couldn't confirm the kill due to Maxwell being pulled inside the bunker. Nevertheless, the disruption to the command structure was already evident as communication patterns shifted from coordinated precision to urgent confusion. "SEAL 7, this is Viper," Morgan transmitted, already breaking down her equipment in preparation for immediate relocation. "Target engaged. Execute extraction now." In the equipment yard, Peterson heard Morgan's transmission and immediately issued the order they had been waiting for. "All teams execute breakout now. Movement by fire teams wounded in the center formation. Maintain suppressive fire and don't stop for anything." The SEAL team erupted from their defensive positions, 20 men moving with coordinated precision born from years of training together. 4 of their original 24 had already been lost to enemy fire. Another 3, including Mitchell, required assistance to move. But they were mobile. And with the enemy command structure temporarily disrupted by Morgan's precision shooting, they had their first real chance of reaching the extraction point alive. Above them, Morgan had just secured the Barrett in its carrying case when Fitzgerald's urgent warning came through her earpiece. "Shadow hostiles have spotted your muzzle flash. They're converging on your position from multiple directions. You need to move now." Morgan slung the rifle case across her back and drew her sidearm, moving deeper into the cave system that had been her planned escape route all along. Behind her, she could hear the approaching footsteps of Dmitry Klov's hunter team, moving with the practiced efficiency of professionals who understood the tactical situation perfectly. They had her cornered in a cave with limited exits. Standard procedure would be to call in additional teams to cover all possible escape routes, then either wait her out or use gas to force her into the open. What they didn't know was that this particular cave system extended more than half a mile into the mountain with natural chimneys and passages that connected to 3 separate exit points across the eastern face. Knowledge that would give Morgan the tactical advantage if she could reach the main junction before Klov's team caught up to her. The pursuit had begun, a deadly game of hunter and hunted played out in the darkness of an ancient mountain, while below them 24 Navy SEALs fought for their lives in a desperate sprint toward possible salvation. Morgan moved through the darkness with practiced confidence, her hand trailing along the cave wall for guidance, while her mind visualized the route she had memorized during dozens of exploratory hikes. 300 meters to the main junction. Then a choice: the narrow chimney that led to the concealed exit on the northeastern face, or the underwater passage that emerged behind a frozen waterfall 200 meters east. Behind her, the voices of her pursuers echoed off the stone walls, professional operators coordinating their movement through unfamiliar territory. They had lights, weapons, and numbers. But Morgan had knowledge that couldn't be found on any map or satellite image. As she reached the junction and prepared to make her choice, Morgan heard a sound that froze her blood more effectively than the mountain winter ever could. The distinctive metallic click of a rifle safety being disengaged, immediately followed by a voice speaking from the darkness ahead. "Hello, Morgan," said Peter Lockwood, his tone carrying the calm confidence of a hunter who has successfully anticipated his prey's movements. "It's been a long time." The darkness of the cave seemed to deepen as Morgan stared at the silhouette of her former instructor. Peter Lockwood stood 15 feet away, his rifle trained on her chest, with the unwavering steadiness that had once made him the Corps' premier sniper trainer. The faint glow from his team's approaching lights cast long shadows across the limestone walls, transforming the cave junction into a natural arena. "You always were predictable, Morgan," Lockwood said, his voice echoing slightly in the confined space. "Brilliant, but predictable. 3 years in these mountains, and you still follow the tactical principles I taught you." Morgan kept her sidearm pointed at Lockwood, her breathing controlled despite the adrenaline surging through her system. "Funny thing about principles, Ghost. Some of us actually believe in them." Lockwood's chuckle held no humor. "Principles didn't save you after Damascus, did they? The Corps you served so faithfully threw you away like spent brass when it became politically expedient. And you found a more appreciative employer." Morgan's eyes had adjusted enough to see Lockwood more clearly now. The man who had once been her mentor looked harder, colder than she remembered. "How much did Maxwell pay you to betray everything you once stood for, enough to live very comfortably for the rest of my life in a country with no extradition treaty?" Lockwood shifted his weight slightly, his rifle never wavering. "More importantly enough, to never again be at the mercy of politicians who see operators like us as disposable assets." Behind Morgan, the voices of Clov's team grew louder as they navigated the cave's main passage. She had perhaps 2 minutes before they reached the junction, trapping her between 2 professional kill teams with nowhere to run. "You have 2 options, Morgan," Lockwood continued. "Surrender now, and I'll ensure you're treated properly. Maxwell wants to speak with you. He believes your talents are being wasted. And the second option, we recover your body instead. Either way, those SEALs die, and Maxwell's operation continues. Your intervention has been impressive, but ultimately futile." Morgan's mind raced through possible scenarios. The narrow chimney passage that had been her planned escape route was directly behind Lockwood. The underwater tunnel leading to the frozen waterfall was to her right, but reaching it would expose her to Lockwood's line of fire for at least 3 seconds. Neither option offered good odds of survival. But Morgan hadn't survived this long by accepting unfavorable odds. "You missed something important during those years you trained me, Ghost," Morgan said, her voice steady, despite the tension coiling through her body. "Something essential about who I am." "And what's that, Shadow?" "I never, ever give up." Morgan dropped to one knee as she fired 2 rapid shots at the stone ceiling directly above Lockwood's position. The 9mm rounds struck a natural fault line she had identified during previous explorations, triggering a cascade of limestone shards and dust that momentarily obscured Lockwood's vision and forced him to step backward. In that split second of distraction, Morgan lunged toward the underwater passage entrance, firing 3 more rounds to keep Lockwood's head down as she rolled behind a large stalagmite formation that provided temporary cover. Lockwood's return fire echoed deafeningly through the cave rounds, ricocheting off stone surfaces with deadly potential. One bullet grazed Morgan's upper arm, sending a hot lance of pain through her shoulder, but failing to stop her momentum as she reached the water passage. "She's heading for the eastern exit," Lockwood shouted to Clove's approaching team. "Circle around and cut her off at the waterfall." Morgan plunged into the frigid underground stream, gasping as the icy water stole her breath. The narrow passage required her to submerge completely, navigating by touch through 50 feet of underwater tunnel before reaching an air pocket that would allow her to breathe again. The water temperature was well below freezing, kept liquid only by constant movement and mineral content. Hypothermia would begin setting in within minutes of exposure. But hypothermia was preferable to the certain death that waited behind her. Morgan pushed forward through the darkness, her lungs burning as she felt her way along the submerged passage. The Barrett rifle case dragged at her back, threatening to snag on the narrow sections of tunnel. But abandoning it wasn't an option. Not when 24 lives still depended on her ability to provide covering fire during their extraction. After what felt like an eternity, but was actually less than 30 seconds, Morgan's head broke the surface in a small air chamber illuminated by faint light filtering through cracks in the rock ceiling. She gasped for breath, the cold already numbing her extremities as she forced herself to keep moving through the partially submerged tunnel. Another 100 feet of wading through chest-deep water would bring her to the exit behind the frozen waterfall. From there, she could reach a secondary position that offered sightlines to both the mining complex and the western extraction route the SEALs would be taking. If she could reach it before hypothermia rendered her incapable of accurate shooting. If Clove's team hadn't already reached the waterfall exit. If Lockwood hadn't anticipated this move and positioned additional forces to intercept her. Too many ifs for comfort, but no time to dwell on them. Morgan pushed forward each step, a battle against the numbing cold and the weight of her waterlogged equipment. Behind her, in the cave junction, Lockwood lowered his rifle, his expression unreadable as Clove's team arrived. The Russian counter-sniper specialist assessed the situation immediately, his cold eyes narrowing with professional disapproval. "You had clear shot," he observed in his heavy accent. "Why didn't you take it?" Lockwood holstered his sidearm with deliberate care. "Tactical assessment. Sullivan is more valuable alive for intelligence purposes." It was a lie, and Clove knew it. In their profession, hesitation rarely stemmed from tactical considerations. It was personal, a momentary failure of will that revealed something Lockwood had been carefully concealing. "She will reach eastern exit in 5 minutes, Clove stated, already turning toward the cave entrance. "We can still intercept." Lockwood nodded, following the Russian out of the cave while his mind wrestled with the decision he had just made. He had deliberately missed a shot he could have made blindfolded. Sullivan had been fully exposed for nearly 2 seconds, an eternity in sniper terms. Any one of his team could have made that shot. But he hadn't. Some remnant of the man he had once been, the instructor who had taken pride in Morgan's achievements, had stayed his finger at the crucial moment. A weakness that Maxwell would consider unforgivable if he ever discovered it. As they emerged from the cave into the intensifying storm, Lockwood made another decision, one that surprised even himself. "Clove, take your team and concentrate on the SEAL extraction point. I'll handle Sullivan personally." The Russian sniper hesitated, clearly suspicious of this change in priorities. Maxwell's orders were clear. The woman is primary target. "And I'm countermanding those orders based on developing tactical situation," Lockwood replied with the authority that had once commanded Marine reconnaissance units. "The SEALs represent a greater immediate threat. They've recovered intelligence materials that could compromise our entire operation." Clove studied him for a long moment before nodding curtly. "As you wish." but you will explain to Maxwell if she escapes. I'll take full responsibility, Lockwood agreed, already moving toward the eastern slope where the waterfall emerged. In the valley below, Lieutenant Commander Peterson led his team through a desperate sprint across exposed terrain, using the confusion created by Morgan's shot at Maxwell to maximum advantage. The snow had intensified, reducing visibility to less than 50 meters, providing some concealment from enemy observation posts. "Hammer status on Mitchell," Peterson called over his shoulder as they crossed a frozen stream bed. Chief Clark, who was helping carry the wounded sniper alongside Petty Officer Porter, responded grimly. "Fading fast, Razor. Doc's pumped him full of stimulants to keep his heart going, but he's losing ground by the minute. We need to reach that extraction point in the next 20 minutes, Peterson said, pushing the pace despite the burn in his lungs from the thin mountain air. Our guardian angel bought us a window, but it won't stay open forever. Petty Officer Palmer, who was leading the forward element with his rifle at the ready, suddenly raised his fist in the universal signal to halt. The team froze instantly, years of training evident in their immediate response. Movement ahead, 2 o'clock, approximately 75 meters, Palmer whispered into his radio. 4, maybe 5 individuals. They're setting up a blocking position. Peterson crawled forward to assess the situation personally. Through his binoculars, he could make out a team of enemy operators establishing an ambush position across their planned route. Maxwell's forces had anticipated their escape direction and were moving to intercept. "Signal try to raise our sniper support," Peterson ordered. "We need overwatch on that blocking position immediately." Petty Officer Hughes attempted to establish communication on multiple frequencies, but received no response. "Sir, nothing but static. Either she's maintaining radio silence or—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. They all understood the implications. Their guardian angel might have been neutralized, leaving them to face the final obstacle alone. "Blast options," Peterson turned to Petty Officer Warren, whose expertise in demolitions had saved the team countless times before. Warren considered the situation, calculating distances and effects. "I've got 2 thermite charges left. Could create a wall of fire to screen our movement, but it would require someone to advance within 20 meters of their position to place them effectively." "High risk," Peterson acknowledged. "But I don't see many alternatives. Prepare the charges. I'll place them myself." "With all due respect, sir," Palmer interrupted, "I should do it. I'm faster, and you're needed to coordinate the overall extraction." Before Peterson could respond, a single shot rang out from somewhere in the mountains to the east. One of the enemy operators in the blocking position dropped immediately, followed by a second shot that eliminated another threat with surgical precision. "Looks like our guardian angel is still watching over us," Chief Clark said, relief evident in his voice. A third shot neutralized the remaining visible threat, clearing their path to the extraction point. Peterson didn't waste the opportunity, immediately signaling the team to advance at maximum speed. "Whoever you are," he whispered toward the mountains, "thank you." Behind the frozen waterfall, Morgan fought through the pain in her injured arm and the numbing cold that threatened to shut down her fine motor control. She had managed to reach the exit just as Clov's team arrived at the waterfall from the opposite direction, using their momentary confusion to slip away through a narrow crevice that led to her secondary firing position. The shot that had hit Maxwell had triggered exactly the kind of chaos she had hoped for. Enemy communication was fragmented, coordination had broken down, and forces that should have been containing the SEAL team were now scattered across the mountains, hunting for her. But the cold was becoming a more immediate threat than Clov's hunter teams. Her wet clothing was rapidly freezing in the sub-zero temperature, and her hands were losing the sensitivity required for precision shooting. She needed to eliminate the blocking force threatening the SEALs, then find shelter where she could address the hypothermia before it became life-threatening. Through her scope, Morgan identified the enemy blocking position where 4 operators had established an ambush along the SEAL's most likely extraction route. The range was more manageable than her previous shots, only on 207 meters, but her physical condition made it equally challenging. "Control, this is Viper," Morgan transmitted, her voice shaking slightly from the cold. "I've been compromised, but have reached a secondary position. SEAL team is moving toward extraction point, but faces a blocking force, engaging now." Colonel Westbrook's response carried both professional concern and personal worry. "Copy, Viper. Be advised that thermal imaging shows multiple hostile teams converging on your general location. Weather is improving slightly. Extraction assets are now approximately 2 hours out." 2 hours. Morgan wasn't sure she had 2 hours left before hypothermia rendered her incapable of effective action. But those concerns would have to wait. First, she needed to clear the path for the SEALs. Morgan steadied her breathing, forcing her shivering body to comply through sheer willpower. The crosshairs settled on the first target, a spotter directing the ambush team's deployment. The Barrett's recoil felt more punishing than usual against her cold, weakened body, but the shot found its mark with deadly accuracy. The second and third shots followed in rapid succession, eliminating the remaining visible threats before they could react effectively to the unexpected fire. Professional efficiency, born from years of training and combat experience, executed despite physical conditions that would have incapacitated a lesser operator. Morgan watched through her scope as the SEAL team advanced past the now neutralized blocking position, moving with the coordinated precision that marked elite special operations units. They would reach the extraction point within 15 minutes if no further obstacles arose. But her own situation remained precarious. The exertion of shooting had accelerated her body's heat loss, and the shivering was becoming more violent, making it increasingly difficult to maintain the stability necessary for accurate fire. "Control SEAL team is clear of immediate threats and proceeding to extraction point," Morgan reported, struggling to keep her teeth from chattering. "I've sustained minor injuries and moderate hypothermia. Relocating to emergency shelter at grid 45872. Copy, Viper. We're tracking your position and will direct extraction assets to your location as soon as weather permits. SEAL team reports they have wounded requiring immediate evacuation. Priority will be given to critical casualties." "Understood, Control. Viper out." Morgan secured her rifle and began the difficult process of moving toward the emergency shelter she had prepared 3 years earlier, a small cabin hidden in a ravine 2 miles east of her current position. If she could reach it, the supplies stored there would allow her to address both the hypothermia and her wounded arm. But first, she needed to ensure that Clove's hunter teams wouldn't follow her trail. The snow had intensified again, which would help conceal her tracks, but professional trackers like Clove would still be able to follow her unless she implemented countermeasures. Morgan forced her cold, numbed legs to carry her in a direction opposite from her actual destination, creating a false trail that led toward a box canyon that appeared to offer shelter, but actually had no exit. Once there, she carefully backtracked, using rocks and fallen trees to move without leaving obvious signs of her passage. The technique would delay pursuit, but not eliminate it entirely. Clove and Lockwood were too experienced to be fooled for long, but delay was all she needed time for the SEALs to reach safety time for her own extraction if weather conditions permitted. Time that was rapidly running out as hypothermia tightened its grip on her body. In the command bunker, Harrison Maxwell lay on a medical cot as his personal physician worked to stabilize his condition. The sniper's bullet had struck him in the upper chest, just missing his heart, but collapsing his right lung and shattering his collarbone. Without immediate medical attention, he would have died within minutes. "Status report," Maxwell demanded, his voice weak, but his eyes still burning with the cold determination that had made him both feared and respected within the intelligence community. Peter Lockwood stood at the foot of the cot, his expression professionally neutral despite the chaos unfolding around them. Sullivan evaded capture at the cave system. Clove's teams are in pursuit, but weather conditions are complicating tracking efforts. And the SEALs, moving toward their extraction point. Sullivan eliminated our blocking force before we could intercept them. Maxwell's face tightened with barely controlled rage. One woman, one disgraced Marine is dismantling an operation that took 18 months to plan. Sullivan is exceptional, Lockwood replied carefully. Her knowledge of the terrain gives her advantages that even our best operators can't match. Find her, kill her. I don't care what it takes. Maxwell's voice dropped to a deadly whisper. And initiate Protocol Omega for the SEALs. If we can't stop them from reaching the extraction point, we make sure they never leave these mountains alive. Lockwood hesitated, recognizing the implications of the order. Protocol Omega involved weaponry that wasn't supposed to exist on American soil, surface-to-air missiles capable of downing military helicopters acquired through black market channels specifically for contingency operations. Using such weapons against American military assets would cross a line that even Lockwood, with all his moral compromises, had never considered breaching. It wouldn't just be a criminal act, it would be an act of war against the United States. Sir, the operational risks of Protocol Omega are acceptable given the alternative, Maxwell interrupted. If those SEALs escape with what they've learned about our operation, every intelligence agency in the world will be hunting us within 24 hours. Everything we've built will be dismantled. Everyone involved will be captured or killed. His cold eyes fixed on Lockwood. Including you, Peter. The implicit threat hung in the air between them. Lockwood had crossed too many lines to ever return to his former life. Maxwell had ensured his complicity in operations that would result in life imprisonment if ever brought to light. Understood, Lockwood said finally. I'll initiate Protocol Omega immediately. As he left the medical area to carry out the order, Lockwood found himself thinking about Morgan Sullivan, the student who had surpassed his expectations, the operator whose career he had followed with professional pride, until Damascus had destroyed it. There had been a time when Lockwood would have unhesitatingly given his life to protect American servicemen, when the thought of firing on a military rescue helicopter would have been unthinkable, when principles meant more than profit. But that man was long gone, replaced by a mercenary whose moral compass had been recalibrated by years of witnessing the hypocrisy of the system he had once served. The same system that had sacrificed Morgan Sullivan without a second thought. Now he was about to escalate from targeting individual operators to shooting down an American military helicopter, crossing a threshold from which there could be no return, unless he made a different choice. At the extraction point, Peterson's team had established a defensive perimeter while tending to their wounded. Jake Mitchell's condition had deteriorated significantly during the final push to reach safety. Despite Porter's best efforts, Mitchell was slipping away, his body no longer responding to the stimulants and emergency treatments that had kept him alive this long. How much longer until extraction arrives? Peterson asked, kneeling beside the dying SEAL. Petty Officer Hughes shook his head. Latest update says at least 90 minutes, sir. Weather's still causing issues for flight operations. Peterson looked down at Mitchell, whose face had taken on the gray pallor that experienced combat medics recognized all too well. He doesn't have 90 minutes. I've done everything I can, sir, Porter said, the frustration evident in his voice. Without surgical intervention, The unspoken conclusion hung in the air. They had fought their way through impossible odds, survived an ambush that should have killed them all, only to lose one of their best operators within sight of safety. Peterson placed his hand on Mitchell's shoulder. "Hang in there, Frost. Help is coming." Mitchell's eyes fluttered open, surprising everyone who had assumed he was unconscious. "Sir," he managed his voice barely audible. "Tell my sister, tell her I was doing what I believed in." "You tell her yourself," Peterson insisted. "That's an order, sailor." A faint smile crossed Mitchell's pale face. "Never been good at following orders, sir." Before Peterson could respond, the radio crackled with an unexpected transmission on their encrypted channel. "SEAL Team 7, this is Overwatch Actual." The voice belonged to Peter Lockwood, the man who had orchestrated the ambush that had nearly killed them all. "Be advised that Maxwell has initiated Protocol Omega. Surface-to-air missiles targeting your extraction helicopters. Estimated deployment in 15 minutes at grid 47390. The team exchanged shocked glances, recognizing the implications immediately. Even if extraction arrived, they would be shot down before they could escape the valley. "Why are you telling us this?" Peterson demanded, suspicion evident in his voice. There was a long pause before Lockwood responded. "Because Maxwell crossed a line I never intended to cross. Targeting individual operators is one thing. Shooting down a helicopter full of American servicemen is another. And we're supposed to trust the man who tried to kill us for the past 6 hours. No, but you should trust the evidence I'm uploading to your communication specialist right now. Complete operational plans for Maxwell's organization. Names, dates, banking records. Everything you need to dismantle his network permanently." Hughes looked up from his equipment, eyes wide. "Sir, we're receiving an encrypted data package. It appears to be authentic, based on preliminary verification." "Why the change of heart?" Peterson pressed. "Let's just say a former student reminded me of principles I'd forgotten." Lockwood's voice carried a weariness that hadn't been present before. "Surface-to-air missile battery is located at the coordinates I provided. You have approximately 12 minutes to neutralize it before they can target your extraction. And Maxwell, wounded but alive. Command bunker at grid 46782. Security detail reduced to 4 operators. The rest are hunting Sullivan." Lockwood paused, then added, "There's something else you should know. Damascus wasn't an intelligence failure. Maxwell deliberately targeted CIA asset Volkov because he had uncovered evidence linking Maxwell to illegal arms sales to terrorist groups in Yemen and Syria. Volkov had accessed files proving Maxwell was selling classified weapons systems while still serving as deputy director. And Sullivan was the perfect instrument, skilled enough to make the shot junior enough to be sacrificed afterward. Maxwell ordered her mission specifically to eliminate Volkov, then orchestrated her disgrace to ensure she could never threaten him. I helped identify her as the ideal candidate." The admission hung in the air, the guilt evident even through the distortion of radio transmission. "Why tell us this now?" Peterson asked. "Because the SEALs aren't the only ones who deserve a second chance." With that, Lockwood cut the transmission. Peterson weighed their options quickly. The SEAL team was exhausted, wounded, and operating with minimal ammunition. But the stakes had just escalated dramatically. If Maxwell had surface-to-air missiles capable of downing military helicopters, he represented a threat far beyond a simple arms dealer. "Hammer, take 4 operators and neutralize that missile battery," Peterson ordered. "Fresh, you're with me. We're paying Maxwell a visit. The rest of you maintain position and protect our wounded." As the team prepared for this final mission, Peterson added one more instruction. "And someone keep trying to reach Sullivan. She needs to know what's happening." In her emergency shelter, Morgan had managed to stabilize her condition through emergency procedures she had practiced dozens of times during her years in the mountains. The small cabin contained medical supplies, dry clothing, and chemical heat packs that had slowly brought her core temperature back to safer levels. The bullet wound in her arm was a through-and-through that had missed major blood vessels and bone. Painful, but not life-threatening with proper treatment. She had cleaned and bandaged it as best she could, then injected a field dose of antibiotics from her medical kit. Morgan was checking her remaining ammunition when the radio crackled with an urgent transmission from Colonel Westbrook. "Viper, this is Control. SEAL team reports Maxwell has deployed surface-to-air missiles targeting extraction helicopters. They're moving to neutralize the threat, but are facing heavy resistance. Extraction ETA now 45 minutes if missile threat can be eliminated." Morgan processed this information quickly, calculating distances and tactical options. The SEALs were exhausted and operating with minimal resources. Their chances of successfully neutralizing a prepared defensive position were slim, especially if Maxwell had concentrated his remaining forces there. "Control, transmit coordinates for the missile battery and current SEAL team positions." As the information came through, Morgan studied her topographical map, identifying the fastest route to provide support. The missile battery was positioned on a ridge overlooking the extraction point, approximately 1,500 meters from her current location. If she could reach a specific overlook position, she would have clear firing lines to the missile operators. Her body protested as she gathered her equipment, the combined effects of hypothermia, blood loss, and physical exhaustion, threatening to overwhelm even her exceptional conditioning. But 24 lives still hung in the balance, and Morgan Sullivan had never been one to abandon a mission before completion. "Control, advised SEAL team that sniper support will be available in approximately 15 minutes. I'm relocating to Position Delta with line of sight to the missile battery." "Copy, Viper. Be advised that Maxwell's security detail has been reduced. Lieutenant Commander Peterson is leading an element to neutralize Maxwell directly." Morgan paused, absorbing this unexpected information. Peterson was taking his team directly after Maxwell, potentially walking into a trap set by the former CIA executive. Without proper intelligence on the command bunker's defenses, they would be at extreme risk. A choice presented itself: support the team targeting the missile battery or provide covering fire for Peterson's assault on Maxwell. Both were critical missions with lives at stake. Both required immediate action. Morgan made her decision in the span of a heartbeat, recognizing that only one target represented both tactical and strategic priority. "Control, change of plans. I'm moving to provide overwatch for the team targeting Maxwell. The missile battery will have to be handled by ground forces." "Understood, Viper. I'll relay your intentions to Lieutenant Commander Peterson." Morgan moved through the forest with renewed purpose, ignoring the pain signals her body was sending with each step. Maxwell had orchestrated the Damascus operation that had destroyed her career, had been responsible for the deaths of countless individuals through his arms-dealing operations, had attempted to eliminate an entire SEAL team simply to protect his criminal enterprise. Personal vendettas had no place in professional operations. But ensuring Maxwell faced justice for his crimes was not just personal, it was a matter of national security. At the missile battery, Chief Clark led his four-man team through the forest with the silent efficiency that had made them among the world's elite special operators. The battery consisted of 2 mobile launcher units concealed beneath camouflage netting, with approximately 10 personnel operating and defending the position. "Blast options," Clark whispered as they observed the site from concealed positions. Petty Officer Warren studied the layout through his binoculars, assessing tactical vulnerabilities. "Those are Russian-made SA-24s, mobile infrared guided. lethal against helicopters up to 20,000 feet. We need to take out both launchers simultaneously, or they'll still get a shot at our extraction birds. How many charges do you have left? 2 thermite, 1 C4. Not enough for a guaranteed neutralization of both platforms. Clark considered their limited options. We'll need to get closer. Use the C4 on one launcher, direct fire on the second, and thermite to cover our extraction. That puts us within 20 meters of their defensive perimeter. They've got at least 3 machine gun positions covering all approaches. I'm open to better suggestions. Before Warren could respond, a single shot rang out from somewhere in the forest to their left. One of the missile battery operators dropped instantly, followed by a second shot that eliminated a security team member near the primary launcher. Clark scanned the ridgeline looking for their mysterious guardian angel, but saw only swirling snow. Looks like we've got unexpected support. Let's not waste the opportunity. Advance while they're distracted. As Clark's team moved forward, using the confusion created by the sniper to close distance with their objective, Master Sergeant Fitzgerald continued his precise elimination of key defensive personnel around the missile battery. The old ranger had positioned himself on a small outcropping that offered clear lines of fire to the missile installation, his weathered hands steady on the hunting rifle he'd carried since arriving in Montana. 4 shots. 4 eliminated threats, creating the window Clark's team needed to reach the launchers and plant their charges. Still got it, Fitzgerald muttered to himself as he watched the SEALs advance. The shooting wasn't as pretty as Morgan's precision work, but it was effective enough for the current tactical situation. More importantly, it had freed her to support the team going after Maxwell, the man responsible for Damascus, for her disgrace for the 3 years she'd spent in isolation. At the command bunker, Lieutenant Commander Peterson and Petty Officer Palmer approached with extreme caution, using the confusion created by Morgan's earlier assault to advantage. The security detail had been reduced as Lockwood had claimed, but the remaining operators were positioned to create interlocking fields of fire that covered all approaches. 2 at the main entrance, at least 1 more on the southern perimeter. Palmer whispered, his young eyes picking out details that would have been invisible to most observers in the fading light. No clear approach without being spotted. Peterson weighed their options, calculating risk against potential reward. Maxwell represented a significant intelligence asset if captured alive. But attempting to breach the bunker with their limited personnel and ammunition could easily result in both their deaths without achieving their objective. We need a diversion, Peterson decided, something to draw their attention while we approach from the blind side. As if in answer to his unspoken request, a series of explosions erupted at the missile battery position nearly a mile away. Chief Clark's team had reached their objective and detonated their charges, creating a spectacular display that immediately drew the attention of Maxwell's security detail. Now, Peterson ordered, rising into a crouch and moving rapidly toward the bunker's northern approach, where a drainage ditch offered concealment to within 15 meters of the entrance. Palmer followed closely, his rifle ready, as they closed the distance in a controlled sprint that minimized their exposure while maximizing speed. Years of training had taught them to move across contested terrain with a fluid efficiency that reduced target profile while maintaining combat effectiveness. They reached the drainage ditch without being spotted, dropping into the shallow depression as the security team continued monitoring the distant explosions at the missile battery site. "On my mark," Peterson whispered, preparing a flashbang grenade. 3, 2, 1. The diversionary device sailed through the air, detonating at the bunker entrance with a blinding flash and deafening report that momentarily disoriented the security team. Peterson and Palmer were moving before the echo faded, firing precise 3-round bursts that eliminated both guards before they could recover. Inside the bunker, Harrison Maxwell heard the commotion and immediately recognized its implications. His security detail was being neutralized, and the Americans were coming for him. With his physician gone to treat wounded at the missile battery, Maxwell was alone with his injuries and rapidly diminishing options. But the former CIA executive hadn't survived decades in the intelligence world without contingency plans. He reached beneath his cot, retrieving a hidden sidearm and a small device that resembled a remote detonator. Insurance against exactly this type of situation. Peterson and Palmer breached the bunker entrance in textbook fashion, clearing each compartment with practiced efficiency until they reached the medical area where Maxwell lay on his cot, apparently incapacitated by his wounds. "Harrison Maxwell," Peterson announced, his rifle trained on the former CIA executive. "You're under arrest for treason, arms trafficking, and the attempted murder of American military personnel." Maxwell's laugh held no humor, only the cold calculation of a man who had already accepted the tactical situation and identified his remaining leverage. "I don't think so, Commander Peterson. Not unless you want to be responsible for the deaths of your entire team." He raised the detonator where both SEALs could clearly see it. "Dead man's switch. My thumb comes off this button, and charges placed throughout this valley detonate simultaneously, including at your extraction point, where your wounded are waiting so patiently." Peterson's expression remained professionally neutral, but his mind raced through the implications. There was no way to verify Maxwell's claim without risking the lives of his team, but surrendering to Maxwell's demands was equally unacceptable. "What do you want?" Peterson asked, buying time while assessing their limited options. "Safe passage out of this valley. A helicopter. Guarantee of no pursuit." Maxwell's voice was steady despite the pain evident in his face. "Once I'm safely away, I'll reveal the deactivation code for the charges." "Not going to happen," Peterson replied flatly. "You've killed American servicemen. There's no deal to be made." Maxwell's smile turned predatory. "Then I suggest you prepare yourself for the consequences, Commander. Your choice: let me leave or explain to your superiors why you chose to sacrifice your entire team for the sake of one arrest." The standoff hung in the air between them, neither man willing to concede. Palmer maintained his covering position, his rifle never wavering from Maxwell's head despite the tension evident in his young face. A single shot shattered the impasse. The bullet entered through the bunker's narrow ventilation port, traveling on a precisely calculated trajectory that struck Maxwell's hand, destroying the detonator without triggering its dead man's switch mechanism. The impact threw Maxwell backward against the wall, his sidearm discharging harmlessly into the ceiling as he screamed in both rage and pain. Morgan Sullivan's voice came through Peterson's radio with calm professionalism. "SEAL 7, this is Viper. Target neutralized. You're clear to proceed with capture." Peterson moved quickly to secure Maxwell, while Palmer provided covering fire. Neither man showing the shock they felt at the precision shooting that had just resolved their impossible situation. "Viper, this is SEAL 7. Outstanding shot. Target secured." Peterson secured Maxwell's uninjured hand with plastic restraints while applying emergency first aid to the wound. "What's your position?" "Northwest ridgeline, approximately 800 meters from your location. Be advised that I've spotted Lockwood moving through the forest toward your position. He appears to be alone. Hostile. Unknown. Maintain security protocols." Peterson nodded to Palmer, who immediately moved to cover the bunker entrance, while Peterson continued securing Maxwell and gathering intelligence materials from the command center. Outside, Peter Lockwood approached the bunker with his hands clearly visible, his rifle slung across his back, in the non-threatening position that signaled peaceful intent. He had made his choice when he warned the SEALs about Protocol Omega, a decision that had likely saved their lives, but permanently marked him as a traitor to Maxwell's organization. "SEAL Team 7, he called out, stopping 30 meters from the bunker entrance. "I'm coming in under flag of truce. I have additional intelligence on Maxwell's operation that you'll need. Palmer kept his rifle trained on Lockwood's center mass, taking no chances despite the apparent surrender. Approach slowly, hands on your head. Any sudden movements, and I will fire. Lockwood complied, moving with the deliberate pace of someone who understood the protocol for surrendering to Special Operations Forces. As he reached the bunker entrance, he glanced toward the ridgeline where he knew Morgan was watching through her scope. "She always was my best student," he said quietly, "even when I didn't deserve her loyalty." In the distance, the distinctive sound of approaching helicopters cut through the mountain air. The extraction team had launched as soon as confirmation came through that the missile battery had been neutralized. Help was finally arriving for the wounded SEALs who had fought so valiantly against overwhelming odds. Morgan observed the approaching helicopters through her scope, allowing herself the first moment of relief since this operation had begun. The SEALs would survive. Maxwell was captured. His organization exposed. A strategic victory that exceeded anyone's expectations when Westbrook had first called her satellite phone that morning. "Control, this is Viper," Morgan transmitted, her voice steady despite the exhaustion threatening to overwhelm her. "SEAL team has secured Maxwell. Extraction helicopters approaching. Mission complete." Colonel Westbrook's response carried both professional acknowledgement and personal gratitude. "Outstanding work, Viper. Extraction team has been briefed on your location. They'll pick you up after securing the SEAL team and prisoners." "Negative control. I'll make my own way out." "Morgan." Westbrook's voice softened slightly. "You've done more than enough. Let us bring you home." Home. The word hung in the air, carrying implications Morgan wasn't ready to process. Her cabin in the mountains had been home for 3 years. The isolation had become familiar, comfortable in its predictability. Returning to the world that had betrayed her meant facing uncertainties she had deliberately avoided. But Maxwell's capture would change everything. The intelligence he possessed could expose the conspiracy that had destroyed her career. The truth about Damascus would finally come to light. Her name could be cleared. More importantly, the 24 hours since Westbrook's call had reawakened something Morgan had thought long dead: purpose. The knowledge that her skills could still make a difference, could save lives that would otherwise be lost. "Control, I'll rendezvous with extraction team at grid 44825. Viper out." As Morgan began the careful process of breaking down her rifle and securing her equipment, she caught movement from the corner of her eye. A figure emerging from the forest to her right, moving with the silent precision that marked a professional operator. Dmitry Klov stood 20 meters away, his rifle held in the low-ready position that could transition to firing stance in a fraction of a second. The Russian's weathered face showed a mixture of professional respect and resigned determination. "You are very good, Morgan Sullivan," Klov said, his accent more pronounced now that he wasn't using radio communication. "Better than they said." Morgan kept her hands visible, making no move toward her sidearm. "It's over, Klov. Maxwell is captured. Lockwood has surrendered. The organization is finished." "Perhaps. But professional reputation matters. Yes, I cannot return to certain circles, having failed to eliminate target assigned to me." "You don't have to do this," Morgan said, recognizing the code of honor that drove men like Klov. "There's no percentage in it anymore. No payment coming." Klov offered a small shrug. "Some things not about money. Sometimes is about respect. Being who you say you are." For a moment, they regarded each other in silence, two professionals who understood the rare skill and dedication their work required. Under different circumstances, they might have respected each other, perhaps even worked together. But the paths they had chosen led inevitably to this confrontation. "One question before we finish," Klov said. Damascus. The shot at Volkov. How far? Despite everything, Morgan found herself answering professionally. 1753 meters. Crosswind gusting to 20 knots. Temperature 108 degrees Fahrenheit. Klov nodded appreciatively. Impressive. I missed similar shot in Chechnya at 1600 meters. Wind took it. Wind's tricky in mountain valleys, Morgan agreed, as if they were colleagues discussing technique rather than adversaries preparing for a lethal confrontation. In my country, there is saying, Klov continued. Hunter, who pursues two hares, catches neither. I focused on missile team, let you support SEAL attack on Maxwell. Tactical error. We all make choices, Morgan replied. Some we live with, some we don't. Klov's smile held a fatalistic acceptance. Indeed, shall we see whose choice prevails today? The confrontation balanced on a knife's edge, each operator calculating distance, reaction time, and probability. Morgan knew her sidearm was no match for Klov's rifle at this range, but she had survived impossible situations before through sheer determination and tactical creativity. As Klov began to raise his rifle, Morgan's hand moved toward her sidearm with the practiced smoothness of thousands of hours of training. But she knew she would be too slow. The Russian had the tactical advantage, and both of them recognized it. Then Klov did something unexpected. He lowered his weapon, his eyes meeting Morgan's with a professional respect that transcended their opposing sides. Someday, perhaps we meet in different circumstances, he said, slinging his rifle across his back. Today, I think both of us have seen enough death. Morgan's hand froze halfway to her sidearm, surprise momentarily overriding her combat instincts. Why? Because professional respect matters more than money, Klov replied simply. And because the shot you made at Maxwell's hand through ventilation port, that was art. Artists should not kill artists, is too rare in this world. With a slight nod that might have been a salute between professionals, Klov turned and disappeared into the forest, moving with the silent efficiency that had made him one of the world's deadliest operators. Morgan stood frozen for several seconds, processing what had just happened. Then a voice called from behind her, "Making friends with the locals." Fitzgerald emerged from the tree line, his rifle held casually but ready. I had him in my sights the whole time, just in case his professional respect wasn't quite professional enough. Morgan let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Art, what the hell are you doing here? I thought you were with Clark's team. I was. Mission accomplished. Missile battery neutralized, extraction helicopters cleared for landing. He nodded toward the approaching sound of rotors. Figured you might need backup for your little chat with our Russian friend. How did you find me? Fitzgerald's weathered face cracked into a rare smile. You're not the only one who knows these mountains, kid. Been hiking them since before you were born. The sound of helicopter rotors grew louder as two Black Hawks approached their position, one circling in a protective pattern, while the other prepared to land in a small clearing 50 meters away. What happens now? Morgan asked the question, encompassing far more than just the immediate tactical situation. Fitzgerald considered her for a moment, his weathered face showing understanding of the crossroads she faced. That depends on you, Shadow. The world's a lot bigger than just these mountains. The lead helicopter touched down its rotors, whipping snow into miniature cyclones as the crew chief signaled for them to approach. Morgan hesitated, looking back toward the distant peak, where her cabin stood, the sanctuary that had sheltered her through 3 years of exile and self-imposed isolation. Then she turned toward the helicopter, decision made. The past could not be changed, but the future remained unwritten. And for the first time in 3 years, Morgan Sullivan was ready to see what that future might hold. 1 month later, Morgan stood on the observation deck of Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, watching the sun rise over the Washington Monument in the distance. The capital had changed little in the 3 years since she had last seen it, but Morgan herself had been transformed by her experiences in the mountains. "Beautiful view," said a voice behind her. Morgan turned to find Lieutenant Commander Peterson approaching his uniform crisp, despite the early hour. "I've always been partial to mountains myself, but I suppose this has its charms." Peterson smiled, coming to stand beside her at the railing. "How's the arm?" "Healing," Morgan replied unconsciously, flexing the limb where the bullet had passed through. "The doctors say I should regain full function within another month." "Good. We might have a use for those skills of yours." Morgan raised an eyebrow questioningly. "I'm still technically a disgraced former Marine commander. Not exactly prime recruitment material." "That's changing as we speak. Maxwell's testimony has corroborated everything you've claimed about Damascus. The Senate Intelligence Committee is reopening your case with Colonel Westbrook, leading the charge for full exoneration. Volkov's original evidence against Maxwell has been recovered from a digital dead drop. It proves he was selling classified weapons systems to militant groups while still serving as deputy director. The news brought a complex mixture of emotions. For 3 years, clearing her name had been Morgan's most deeply held desire. But something had shifted during those desperate hours on Devil's Backbone. Something more fundamental than official recognition or institutional acceptance. "And Jake Mitchell?" she asked, changing the subject. "How's he doing?" Peterson's expression brightened. "Making a full recovery against all medical predictions. Doc Porter says it's sheer stubbornness keeping him alive. Mitchell insists it was knowing someone had his back when everything went sideways." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, two warriors who had faced death together and emerged changed by the experience. "I've been authorized to make you an offer," Peterson said finally. "Joint Special Operations Command is forming a new unit. Small elite operating outside conventional parameters. Specifically tasked with high-risk extraction and precision elimination missions in denied territories. And they want the disgraced sniper as what, a cautionary tale? As our principal operator." Peterson turned to face her directly. "What you did on that mountain wasn't just skill, Morgan. It was something rarer. The willingness to risk everything for people you didn't even know, who represented an institution that had betrayed you. That's the kind of integrity we need." Morgan considered the offer, weighing it against the peace she had found in isolation. The mountains had been her sanctuary, but they had also been her prison, a place to hide from both the injustice of her past and the uncertainty of her future. "I work alone," she said finally. "Always have." "Not this time," came another familiar voice. Morgan turned to find Master Sergeant Fitzgerald approaching, accompanied by Petty Officer Ian Palmer. "This time you'd have a team, people who understand what it means to operate in the shadows." "The old wolf and the young gun?" Morgan asked, a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth despite her attempt at professional detachment. "Interesting combination. We prefer to think of it as experience and enthusiasm," Fitzgerald replied dryly, "with your particular brand of stubbornness to keep us honest." "Lockwood will be joining us too," Peterson added. "After his testimony against Maxwell and his cooperation in dismantling international arms networks, he's been offered a reduced sentence in exchange for serving as a tactical advisor. Turns out he's been trying to make things right for you since Damascus, sending anonymous intel to Westbrook, keeping tabs on you from a distance." "And now we're supposed to work together?" Morgan asked, skepticism evident in her voice. "Redemption comes in many forms," Fitzgerald observed. "Some seek it in isolation, others in action. He's chosen his path, same as you're choosing yours." Peterson extended his hand, offering a simple flash drive. "Everything you need to know is on there." Take a few days. Think it over. Morgan accepted the drive, feeling its weight in her palm, a physical representation of the choice before her. Return to the mountains and the solitude she had mastered, or step back into a world that had once betrayed her trust. A world that still needed what she could offer. One condition. Morgan said, her decision already made despite the token resistance. We operate by our own rules. No political considerations, no sacrificial pawns to protect institutional interests. That's why we want you, Peterson confirmed. Someone who understands the cost of compromise at a personal level. As the morning sun illuminated the capital city, Morgan Sullivan, once called Shadow, now perhaps something new, looked toward the distant mountains that had sheltered her through her darkest days. They would always be there, offering sanctuary if needed. But for now, a different path beckoned. A path where her skills could serve a purpose greater than survival. Where the lessons learned in isolation could be applied to protect those who faced impossible odds. Where the last sentinel could become something more. A week later, as Morgan packed the few personal belongings she would take from her mountain cabin, she found herself pausing at the window that overlooked Devil's Backbone Valley. The snow was beginning to melt, the first hints of spring emerging in the higher meadows. Soon, the alpine flowers would transform the harsh landscape into something softer, more forgiving. She heard Fitzgerald's footsteps on the porch behind her, the old ranger arriving precisely when he said he would, to help with the final preparations. "Second thoughts?" he asked, observing her pensive expression. "No," Morgan replied, surprised to discover it was true. "Just saying goodbye." "The mountains will still be here," Fitzgerald observed. "Some sanctuaries you carry with you." Morgan nodded, shouldering her pack, with the same fluid efficiency that had characterized every movement in her military career. The Barrett rifle case waited by the door, along with a smaller, more discreet carrying case designed for the custom weapon that JSOC had already provided. "You know," Fitzgerald said, as they stepped outside into the crisp mountain air, "the best snipers aren't just the ones who make the impossible shots. They're the ones who understand when to pull the trigger and when to wait." "And which am I?" Morgan asked, securing the cabin door for the final time. Fitzgerald's weathered face creased in a rare smile. "You're the one who finally learned that some battles are worth fighting, even when the odds are impossible." As they descended the trail toward the waiting helicopter, Morgan felt the weight of the past 3 years lifting from her shoulders. Damascus would always be part of her history, but it no longer defined her future. That future was hers to write one precision shot at a time. The last sentinel had found her purpose again, and the mountains would be waiting when she returned.